Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to this session. My name is Jacqueline Peterson Loomis. I am the founding executive director and recently retired executive director, and the person who has worked with Gloria at the onset to establish this session. So I'm here basically to welcome you on behalf of both the Portland Chinatown Museum and the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, who are the two sponsors of this session. And I just want to spend a minute introducing Gloria Lee to you as the organizer and moderator of this session. Gloria serves on the board of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance. She's also the executive director of the Giving Tree. She brings 15 years of experience in growing nonprofits and more than 25 years experience in senior management with Cisco. Gloria is a first-generation Chinese American born in Arlington, Virginia. Her father is likely a paper son who went back to China for an arranged marriage with her mother in Toisan. Her parents ran two hand laundries in the suburbs of Arlington during the 1950s. In 2000, Gloria transitioned from the VP of Merchandising at Cisco to Executive Director of Portland's newly opened Classical Chinese Garden, now the Lansu. She fell in love with mission-driven organizations and thrives on growing successful nonprofits. At the Giving Tree, Gloria combines her passion for building community, using arts and culture as foundational cornerstones, and connecting diverse populations to each other. Besides gardening, cooking, and reading, Gloria believes in giving back, and I can affirm that. She has served on the boards of Cedar Mill Library, Travel Portland, Northwest China Council, and the Old Town Chinatown Community Association. Welcome, Gloria, and the rest of your panel. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and welcome to everyone. This is an exciting day. I was listening to the opening speech by Phil Dela Cruz, and some of the remarks he had are very applicable to what we'll be discussing here. Today, we're going to explore some different avenues to confronting Asian hate. And these are not unique to Asian hate, but it's just the experience, and I'm going to speak from my personal experience of confronting hate. These are avenues, big avenues that we can use to look at how we confront hate and how we de-escalate hate. Each of us has a different style, a different personality, a different uniqueness. There are many, many roads to travel, but the most important thing is to participate. The most important thing is to use our voice. And with that, we're here today to use our voice for a short 50 minutes. And I'd like to introduce Jackie Leung, who will be our first speaker. And Jackie, feel free to tell us about yourself and just proceed.
Thank you, Gloria, for the introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Jackie Leung. I am going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint presentation. So one moment while I do that and set it up under presenter view. It takes a moment for me to do those things, so apologies. All right, so today my presentation is going to be on Asian American Pacific Islander leadership in government. And again, my name is Jackie Leung. And a little bit about myself. I am Salem's first Asian American or Pacific Islander City Councilor. And I believe I am the 5th Black, Indigenous, or person of color to ever sit on City Council. I am currently in my 3rd year in office. I'm a working mother of 4 children between the ages of 2 to 12. Big, huge age gap there. I'm also the executive director of a statewide nonprofit that provides services and support to the Micronesian and Pacific Islander community. And today, my conversation is going to be focusing on the importance of leadership, politics, and representation. So I would like to start off my talk centering with a quote from Margaret Cho. The power of visibility can never be underestimated. To me, this quote is powerful. Powerful because while I was growing up, this is what I would hear. Asian and Pacific Islanders are not involved in politics. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders do not talk about politics. Don't make waves. Politics are not something we talk about. How many of you heard that growing up? How many of you still hear it today? So why is this significant? So according to the May 4th article in Politico, Asian Americans are the least likely to hold elected office. Even though we are the fastest growing demographic, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders account for less than 1% of all elected leaders. This came from a report from the Reflective Democracy Campaign that Asian American and Pacific Islander members make up only 0.9% of elected leaders across all levels of government. But 6.1% of the population make up 6.1% of the population as of mid-2020. And so this information is important for several reasons. Again, this came from the Politico. Currently, Asian American Pacific Islander representation in the 2021 Congress includes Senators Mazie Hirono, a Democrat from Hawaii, and Tammy Duckworth, a Democrat from Illinois. There are also 15 representatives, nearly evenly split between men and women. However, in state office, there's 152 Asian American Pacific Islander state legislators across 31 states, with 1/3 of them representing majority white districts. And this matters, again, for multiple reasons. First and foremost, representation. Growing up, there was no one who looked like me in local office. And if there was, I had no idea who they were. Second, not talking about politics is detrimental. We just didn't talk about politics in my family. I just remember the first and only time I talked about politics when I was a child. I was 8 years old. And I had seen an ad about presidential elections. And I only knew about this one person named Reagan who was running. And I'm aging myself here. And I remember I liked him because I remember seeing his eyes in the ads and feeling like his eyes were similar to my grandfather's, very soulful, very in-depth. I remember I asked my mom, "Who are you voting for?" And her response to me was to silence me. She said, "We don't talk about those things." And when I asked her why, she said, "We just don't." And so from that one experience, I learned that politics was taboo and not something we talk about openly. Third, this lack of connection did not inspire me to vote. At 18, I registered to vote. Did I vote? I think I did. I don't remember how many I voted in, but I know I did skip several elections, local elections even, because I didn't feel like there was a connection. I didn't know who they were. They sure as hell didn't know who I was. The worst part about it is I felt like there was no one who looked like me. And that was until 2008, when a presidential candidate had the audacity to ask voters to hope. And I hoped big. For those 8 years, I hoped. So then, why did I get into politics? In 2018, I ran for Salem City Council. Did I have any political experience before then? I did start as a commissioner, as a human rights commission with the Salem Human Rights Commission, but otherwise I didn't have any political background. I just knew I was tired of the politics and decisions that were being made without consideration of community input. Who we have elected in office makes decisions that impact us years down the line. Maybe not you today, but perhaps your children or your children's children. But every day I knocked. I walked the pavement, going door to door. Phone calls. This was, again, pre-COVID, so I was able to do phone calls, door knocking, all the things you could think of before we had to social distance and stay away from people. And I won. But even though I was elected and I now serve on city council, I still stand alone quite a bit when it comes to voting. but I still listen to the community. I speak out and I advocate and I call on my fellow counselors to vote with me on community issues. Often I am the sole vote going the opposite direction of where council votes on. But here's the thing, I stick to my principles. Even when I do not have the votes, I still show up. So what can you do? My ask of you is simple. Represent. So what does that mean? Run. Run big campaigns. Black, Indigenous, and people of color are underrepresented in all levels of leadership. Nonprofits, businesses, government, boards, commissions. When I first started, I didn't have support. Yet I built that support. I found that grounding. And so can you. You can look to your left, look to your right, or in this case, because we're on Zoom, look at your panelists or group of people that you have on your screen. Now think about your colleagues. Who's your support? Your champions, and you can do it. But if you're not ready to run and you're not ready for leadership, support qualified BIPOC who will champion you. Give it your time, give your money, volunteer, call, knock on doors, ask for donations from other people. You want to make sure that who you have representing you is somebody that you can champion. So represent your family, represent your community, represent you. I'd like to end my presentation with a quote from a Micronesian elder who passed away a few years ago, rates on this, of Chuukese leader. Ekis, ekis. In English, that translates to little by little, little by little. Thank you.
Jackie, thank you so much. And I also want to mention too that among the 3 panelists right now on here, we are broad termed Asians, but we're many different kinds of Asian. And Jackie, if you want to take an extra minute or so and talk about the Micronesian community, I'd really appreciate it, because I'm going to talk about the Cantonese community. So I just, one of the big things we have to do is disaggregate the word Asian, because there are many cultures and many languages and many geographics of Asian.
Yes, of course. I'm happy to speak briefly about the Micronesian community. So Micronesia, it stands for Little Islands, and the organization that I represent, the Micronesian Islander community, it consists of several different regions, including the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of Palau, the Republic of Marshall Islands, as well as Guam and the Central Marianas Islands. And that's just a part that my organization represents. And it is a growing community, not only in Oregon, but throughout the US in certain regions. Micronesians specifically had moved here initially to come for school or work. And now as time has passed, more individuals are coming for health needs and other concerns, primarily, well, one thing to consider, especially when we're talking about the word Micronesian, it consists of different groups. So some of the community members I had mentioned from Palau, Federated States of Micronesia, and Marshall Islands, some of them might also be citizens from the Compact of Free Association, or COFA citizens. So COFA citizens are allowed to come here legally with just a passport and I-94 with a compact that was signed with the US government. In exchange, the US government has military occupancy on many of their islands. In the 1940s, there were nuclear atomic bomb testing that occurred on some of the outer islands of the Marshall Islands, resulting in severe health impacts to the community. So there's a larger number of people who are coming here now with some of those health issues, as well as now climate change, which is threatening their livelihood, besides individuals who are still coming for work and for school.
Thank you so much. I think it always helps to dig a little deeper and understand that we may all be Asians, but we come from many different places and speak many different languages and have a very diverse history. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Judy Lee, who is not my sister, We share the same last name. Judy's going to introduce herself and talk about how culture and food relates as a big avenue to confronting hate. So Judy.
Thank you, Gloria. Hi, everyone. My name is Judy Lee. I lead the collaboration among various groups, including the Giving Tree, the Hollywood Senior Center, Clay Street Table, Oregon Chinese Coalition, among others, to create the first culturally specific Asian pantry here in Portland, Oregon. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, provided by the Jewish Federation, the Portland Chinatown Museum, and the Chinese American Citizen Alliance, and to discuss one of my favorite topics, which is food and culture. So with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And give me just one moment. And we're gonna just make sure everyone can see this okay? All right. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am a first-generation immigrant from Taiwan. My family had moved to Oregon when I was 12 years old, when there were very few Asian or Asian American families here in the late 80s. I am kind of giving you my age. But because of the limited availability of Asian goods, I had the good fortune of growing up in a family that loved food, loved cooking, and we also owned a few restaurants. So now I help with also organizing the Asian Food Group, which is a community organization that go out and try the various Asian restaurants here that Portland has to offer. Now, this may sound very strange. I'm actually very grateful to the pandemic because it has given me an opportunity to jump into the nonprofit space along with Gloria's guidance to really propel my work in serving the low-income Asian seniors through the pantry program. So I've been thinking a lot about, if you will, hate and fear, especially with the rising anti-Asian hate and having a few close friends that had horrible experiences right here in Portland. I've been thinking about the relationship. What is hate and what is fear, and how do we find common ground? Hate has its origin in fear. We're afraid of what we don't know. And what we don't know, we classify as the other. And it becomes so much easier to push out the other and live in the comfort of what is known. So in my opinion, the most effective way to combat that fear is to share with each other so that the unknown becomes known. And one of the best way to, and the easiest way to do that is through food. If you love our food, it becomes that much easier to love us. With that said, I'd like to share with you a little bit about Asia and Asians, just as Gloria had mentioned earlier. It's a huge continent and has so many different populations. Even within the US government, there is differences on how do you count Asian Americans. As Jackie had mentioned earlier, representation matters. I'm gonna tell you, I cannot speak for all Asian Americans, nor can any of the panelists. I can't even speak for all the Taiwanese Americans here in Oregon. But what I can share with you is my lived-in experience as a Taiwanese immigrant growing up here in Oregon. How do I reconcile my American identity and share the foods and cultures of my family? We will talk about the 4 traditional holidays celebrated both in Taiwan and China, as well as in the US by the Chinese and Taiwanese Americans overseas. We'll talk about the food that's associated with the holidays, and I'll share some pictures so you get to see the food. If this was a real presentation in person, I will be bringing the foods to you. However, you will just have to see it via Zoom and try out in the Asian restaurants. And hopefully that will entice you to love Chinese and Taiwanese cuisine even more. So let's talk about the diversity of Asia for a moment. It is the largest and most populous continent in the world. covering 4 billion people in 17 million square miles with 48 countries. Therefore, it is impossible to offer a unified history of Asia due to its immense size and diverse population. It may help to think of Asia as 5 different groups or different regions. And within each region, there's more shared food, cultural norms, and customs. But by no means is it a monolithic group. Therefore, when somebody asks me, what's your favorite Asian restaurants in Portland? I always respond with, I can't answer that. I can tell you what my favorite Korean restaurant is, what my favorite Thai restaurant is, or my favorite Indian restaurant is. Because each country, each culture and food is so different, and we are not a giant melting pot. What it becomes even more complicated is that the US government counts Asian Americans very differently than this map. So in the map, you see the 5 regions. However, on the US Census, it specifically asks about East Asian, which are China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Southeast Asia, which encompasses the area that includes the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, etc., as well as South Asia, which is on the Indian subcontinent. Therefore, if you or your family is from Central or West Asia, you're not considered Asian American. You're considered Middle East Americans. And to add confusion to the matter, some of the government data will include Pacific Islanders and some will not. So therefore, it's difficult to reach what is a consensus on the overall population. Now, what we do know is we would define today, for our discussion purpose only, Asian Americans as those who can trace their roots to more than 20 countries in East and Southeast Asia, as well as the Indian subcontinent. We each have our unique history, culture, languages, and other characteristics. Now, within this population, it is incredibly diverse with 23 million people with all the different languages and food. Did you know that the Asian American is the fastest rising population and that our numbers are projected to surpass 46 million by the year 2060, nearly 4 times the current total, which is only 7% of our population. Here in Oregon, if we count the Pacific Islanders, it's about 5.4% of population. And out of that, 22% of them live here in Sonoma County. Now, Chinese Americans is the largest Asian origin group here in the US. Therefore, we will share specifically on the holidays, and given my background being Chinese and Taiwanese American, we're going to focus on the Chinese American holidays. So what are the 4 major festivals that we all celebrate, if you will? These are the 4 that, whether or not you are in China, Taiwan, or here, even in the US, many Chinese and Taiwanese Americans still celebrate. Now, in China and Taiwan, these are also recognized as public holidays. So everybody have the time off to celebrate. But here in the US, unfortunately, none of these are public holidays. So very often you will see the Chinese and Taiwanese American community celebrate them perhaps not on the exact day, but just within that time range. Many of you may be familiar with some of these holidays already because organizations like the CACA or the Oregon Chinese Coalition have fantastic events, or the Chinatown Museum, associated with these special holidays. We have parades, we might have lantern viewing festivals. There's even dragon boat racing going on the waterfront as part of the Rose Festival. So this may be a reminder for you. But what you may not know are some of the food that's associated with these festivals. So in this slide, you will see the festivals are listed in a chronological order. However, in the next part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about them starting with the Dragon Boat Festival, because that's what's coming up first. You will also understand that due to the geographic vastness of the area of China and Taiwan, many of the foods and traditions are different, and it's going to be different based on province or even your family traditions. So with that said, let's talk about the first festival, which is the Dragon Boat Festival. This, if you will, is perhaps the one that has the most legend and the most superstitions. This is also where the dragon boat comes in. There are two legends, if you will, behind this festival. It is celebrated on the Lunar New calendar, which is different than the Gregorian calendar. It's on the 5th day of the 5th month, which typically will be around June in our day-to-day calendar. And for this year specifically, it will be on June 14th. Now, this festival involves two parts. One is, if you will, to ward off evil spirits, insects, illness, or bad luck, because the number 5 is not a positive number in the Chinese numerology. So we have a lot of traditions, such as wearing perfume pouches around, you to ward off evil spirits. We also hang specific herbs outside your door to prevent the insects from coming your house. The herbs is called calamus. But probably the better known legend behind the Dragon Boat Festival is that it commemorates the death of Qu Yuan, who was a poet and a politician who lived in about 300 before the Common Era. He was accused of treason and banished from the political office. So in his despair, he committed suicide by drowning himself in the Milo River. Because he was so popular and a good official to the people, after his death, after his suicide, the people raced in their boats to try to rescue him or to at least prevent his body being eaten. At the same time, they threw rice dumplings into the river so the fish would eat the rice dumplings instead of eating his body. So that's where we get the tradition of the dragon boat racing and the rice dumplings. So the tradition, if you're with our family, is we watch the dragon boat races, and we also then, if you will, eat the rice dumplings. Now, over in Taiwan and China, it's very easy to buy these rice dumplings, also known as zongzi. Here in the US, especially growing up in the 80s and 90s, that was very difficult. So we had to make our own. So here in the pictures, on the left upper corner, you will see the dragon boat racing. That's actually one of my personal pictures. If you count third row from the front, you might see a glimpse of me rowing the boat just for that day. We also have on the bottom left a tradition called, in Taiwan especially, called standing up the egg. So this is an egg that if you can let it stand, then you will bring a year of good luck ahead. The rice dumplings are kind of shaped like a triangle, if you will, or like a pyramid shape. You will see on the lower right, that's me and my friends making the rice dumplings. The rice dumplings have very different fillings, and that really varies regionally. So you might have sweet fillings like red bean and mung bean, or you could have savory fillings like pork belly and mushrooms. So it's always fun to try out different style rice dumplings. And here, there are restaurants and bakeries around here in Portland where you can buy them. So we can talk about that later also. So after the Dragon Boat Festival, what's gonna come in the fall is the Mid-Autumn Festival. Now, this is, if you will, the second most important family gathering. It occurs again from the lunar calendar on the 15th day of the 8th month. So August 15th on the lunar calendar. Now, in the Gregorian calendar, it will happen sometime in September, usually. Family gatherings are an essential part of this festival. If you will, it's similar to Thanksgiving, where you're expected to reunite with your family because the round shape, because it happens on the 15th of the lunar month. So it is a full moon. And there's a saying that goes, as the moon is round, the family is gathered around as well. 月圆人圆. And part of the tradition, depending on whether you're from China or Taiwan, is either to light lanterns or to float the sky lanterns. Another tradition with your family is to simply enjoy the time with the family, eat some mooncakes, and observe the moon. Now, there used to be old legends about a goddess living on the moon and how she watches over the people, etc. But unfortunately, with the moon landing back in the 60s, that destroyed the Chinese legend. So now we know there's no moon goddess living on the moon anymore. Some of the common food we'll be eating are moon cakes, pomelo, osmanthus cakes, and crab, because obviously being August, September is a great crab season. So again, this is something that you can buy in the bakery, typically in China and Taiwan, but here in Portland, you can buy them in the local bakery, or you can get together with a bunch of friends and make them yourselves. So as you can see, this is one of our gatherings pre-COVID that we were making mooncakes, and I think we made red bean and custard filling. So just like the rice dumplings from the Dragon Boat Festival, if you will, there are various fillings as well, depending on what regions of China or Taiwan you're from. Some are sweet, so some do have red bean, lotus seed, which is the most common, I think, Cantonese style, as well as custards. The new updated version, if you will, nowadays also have, many of them have fruit fillings. There are also parts of China that has meat inside them, or the variety of nuts also. So now that we have talked about the Dragon Boat Festival, the Mid-Autumn Festival, the next festival, if you will, is probably the one that's most familiar to everyone, because we always have a big celebration in the Chinese and Taiwanese community, which is the Lunar New Year. Again, it's based on the lunar calendar, which is January 1st. But when you switch it to the Gregorian calendar, typically it happens sometime between late January to February. The length of the festival ranges depending on if you celebrate the traditional, very traditional way, which is from 3 days prior to the New Year begins, all the way till the 15th of January. But I think most of the time, modern days, is celebrating between 3 to 8 days. Here, unfortunately, in the US, because we don't have the day off, my family are often will take a personal day just so that we can be with family. The most important thing is to gather around with your family and have a reunion dinner. There's a legend how this festival come about is the legend of the Nian monster. It started about 4,000 years ago, and the legend goes that this monster comes out from hiding in search of food and attacking villages and devouring people and animals along the way. So the color red ward off the monster and welcome the good fortune. And the monster was also afraid of firecrackers. That's why you hear a lot of firecrackers light up during this time of the year. There's a lot of superstitions in this festival. Many Chinese believe that whatever you do on the first day, so January 1st of the Lunar New Year, will be with you for the rest of the year. So for example, you avoid doing any housework on January 1st, because if you do housework on January 1st, that means the rest of the year you're going to be spent doing housework. There are things that you cannot touch, like scissors. You want to avoid scissors and knives on January 1st as well. And some of the most common food eaten are food dishes like this. Now, this is quite an elaborate setup. It's more the traditional. However, you will notice that there are at least 10 dishes, if not more, because 10 is the perfect number in the Chinese culture. And you will always have a fish with the head and the tail, because many of these dishes and food are homophones. So in other words, there are words that sound the same as other words in Chinese. The word for fish also sounds the same as the word for abundance. So fish would symbolize abundance. Lotus root, for example, symbolizes, good luck. So there are many foods that you will see on the table in any Chinese household coming together for the reunion dinner. In addition, there are specific traditions over this 1st to the 15th, if you will, period, that have various food. So for example, on the 2nd of January is when married daughters will return to their home, meaning their maternal homes, and have lunch with their family. But tradition says it's best to return to the husband's home before the evening to have dinner with the in-laws. So this is quite an elaborate feast. When I was growing up, definitely my family had always cooked a big traditional meal. I remember taking my grandmother and my dad days to prepare, because very often you're going to be making sausages and fish and other things ahead of time, in addition to what you see in front of you. Now, being here in the US, and I am not going to cook 10 dishes for just me and my friends, we take the, if you will, a cheating way out, which is using the hot pot. So hot pot also symbolizes togetherness. So it's, you will think about it as a Chinese fondue. You have different ingredients of food that you're gonna dip into broth. In this case, we have the spicy and the non-spicy version. So you will have, different cuts of meat, vegetables, and fish balls, etc., to be dipped into that. The last festival I'm going to talk about is the Tomb Sweeping Festival, which is the most somber, but it's focused on remembrance and gathering. It has a very strange name, if you will, but it's also called the Qingming Festival, or Pure Brightness Festival. I prefer that name better. It's rooted in the Confucius belief of paying respect to the ancestors. So multiple generations will gather together, go to the ancestral tombs of the family, and the sweet part comes from sweeping the weed and cleaning up. It's important to spend time with a family. And it's also important that on this festival, we do not eat anything hot. So all the food will be served at room temperature. These are sticky rice that's colored 5 different colors, or different glutinous cakes, or if you will, a crepe-like filling with vegetables. So through the food, hopefully this has provided you with a glimpse of the Chinese and the Taiwanese American culture. What actions can you take to show your solidarity with us? First of all, share the food. Try the different seasonal offerings or specialties at the local restaurants or bakeries. I really encourage you to seek out Asian-owned businesses. As an example, if you're interested in tea, instead of buying tea, nothing against Smith's Tea, instead of buying tea there, but buy tea at the Red Robe tea shop in Chinatown. Be curious and ask questions. Ask your Asian American friends, what food do they eat with their families? I will also humbly ask you to commit your time. Participate in these celebrations. Both the Portland Chinatown Museum, as well as Lansu Garden and the Oregon Chinese Coalition, put on various events throughout the year. So please go join them and celebrate. If you will, also support school curriculum that talk about the histories of people of color. And lastly, with your resources, donate. Donate to the Asian Food Pantry, to the Asian Health Center, and participate in trainings offered by Hollaback to show solidarity with anti-American and Asian hate. If you have any questions, we can take them in the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gloria.
Thank you, Judy. Food is so important to us, and it is a uniting factor across all cultures. I'm going to talk a little bit about K through 12 education. I know there are a lot of educators in this larger group of participants. And then I'm also going to talk about the many nonprofits and how we can be allies with each other and how we can work cross-culturally. And I'm thinking, am I getting this Zoom? Okay. Governor Brown signed House Bill number 2845 in June of 2017. Just think how long ago that was, which directed the Oregon Department of Education to convene advisory groups to develop ethnic studies standards into a statewide social studies curriculum. So part of that direction was to have advisory groups, 14 members from a very diverse area. That was to start in June of 2018, with ethnic studies to be adopted by 2020, with implementation by 2021. A lot of things have happened. On February the 10th of 2021, the update from the Department of Education was to move it forward for approval from the State Board of Education. That was adopted in February of 2021, to be available for teaching in 2021 through 2022. It now is a requirement that all school districts across Oregon will have curriculum and ethnic studies available in all school districts for the school year 2026 and 2027. I'm giving you this timeline to help everyone understand that the progress of education, especially when we are trying to encompass the entire state across many different cultures, from African Americans to Ethiopians to Asian Americans, is a long process. But the good news is, as someone previously said, we begin with the first step and we move forward. And along the way, we have people who support us in moving forward. The Oregon State Department of Education also said that educators can begin implementing whatever curriculum they have worked on, starting with the school year 2021. And of course, all of us know what happened in March of 2020, when we all resorted to staying home and being safe and Zoom school. So it is really important to get back on track and to fund the development of instructional materials for all social studies at all grade levels. There is 26 pages by grade level of the preliminary outline for what ethnic studies will look like. And I'm going to ask that we post it on the Chinese American Citizens website so that people can review it by grade level. I believe commentary is still accepted as we move forward. So as we move forward, what we realize that has happened is we just can't make this happen overnight. So in 2019, 2 years later, House Bill 2023 was passed to align the instructional materials with the new standards, which now requires that the Department of Education provide professional development to teachers and educators. It doesn't happen miraculously. There's not a textbook that we buy. We will be inventing and we will be providing materials for the ethnic studies curriculum and standards. So my point is that it takes a long time. It doesn't happen overnight, but when it happens, it will be inclusive and hopefully it will be grade appropriate for all grades, and that my grandchildren, that dates me because I'm 70, that hopefully my grandchildren, and maybe not, it may be their children, will have the opportunity to be in a social studies class where they can open a textbook and they can see someone that looks like themselves and they can read about the history of their great grandparents or grandparents. And I think that Kepiolani, did you share there are some resources that educators have been working on, and I'm really a congratulatory note to the Portland Public Teachers Association and to all the many people that are working on bringing together resources, because there are a lot of resources, but they're all over the place. And it's shared on Whova now, a couple of particular resources that I think are very, very beneficial. So for those of you that are listening, look it up, look at the resources, get involved, ask your children, ask your grandchildren, talk to your peers and colleagues who are teachers. Find out who is handling your social studies curriculums in your school and say, what's happening? What's going on? Show the interest. That's where we're on K through 12 education. Oregon is one of the few states that have mandated ethnic studies. So this started again way before 2017. It started actually, I think, with many of us going to Salem in 2016 to advocate for ethnic studies. Looking at the time, I want to quickly go over some items that I think that would be very helpful. The first one that I'm always cognizant of when is to thank the Jewish Federation and the Portland Chinatown Museum for having us on as part of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance. When I was executive director of Lansu Garden, we worked with an educator who is still a great mentor and peer to me, Joan Kavicka, and she introduced me to the concept of Tikkun Olam, to repair the world. It's a Jewish phrase that is used prevalently. And it is hopefully, it is my personal philosophy that Tikkun Olam is very aligned with what we need to do as individuals together and collectively to bend the arc of history towards justice, to repair the world. Discover the good in the world. Okay, we do that by sharing with others. We do that by hearing and not reacting. We do that by listening with our hearts. A quick little statistic. Did you know that the average American spends 2,655 hours volunteering, but they spend 5 times as many hours shopping? Think about how we live our lives and what we can do to contribute to repairing the world. There are, for nonprofits, for all of us, we have a responsibility in the Asian American communities to dispel the model minority myth, which serves to create stereotypes which are not indicative of the communities that we are. We need to disaggregate the data slowly but surely. As Judy said, the Chinese Americans are one of the largest groups in Oregon, but there are 50 other groups who have different food, different language, different customs, different cultures. There is cross-cultural intersectionality, and where there is that is where the first meeting point is, that we need to come together, identify our common ground within our own communities, and then come together to introduce our cultures to the wider world. And I'll give an example of that. It has bugged me for absolutely years that oftentimes in city government, they refer to Asian Americans, they refer to Chinese, they refer to the language when they say, do you speak Chinese? Well, no, I don't speak Chinese. Do I speak Mandarin? Do I speak Cantonese? Do I speak Shanghainese? So there are many different dialects. When we talk about writing, are we talking about traditional or are we talking about simplified? So drilling down a little bit, I've been asked, drilling down a little bit, it's important to learn all these nuances. So disaggregate the data, learn and speak the pain, the truth, and tell your story. Recognize your own implicit bias, because we all have it, and work together. And with that, I'm going to sum it up really quickly so we have time for questions. And I'll go back to, again, Tikkun Olam. Thank you. We can take questions. I'm not seeing, okay, so I am being told we don't have time for questions, but let me give you the reference. Chinese American Citizens Alliance, Portland. If you'll write to us at that address, I will make sure all the questions get answered and send the resource materials out. Okay, Capulani, we're there. Thank you very much for our listening to us, and have a wonderful conference for the rest of the day. There are many great sessions.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.